I was just saying I've been breaking stupid records. It's actually how my dad did his backing.
Oh, what was he trying to do?
He was going for the longest duration balancing a bike on his chin. But we had one that was way too heavy for what it needed to be. But it's like, no, I could just push through it. I'll do it with this. I was just saying I've been breaking stupid records.
Done an old chopper or something.
What, sorry?
An old chopper bike. You ever seen a chopper?
Oh, what is that, a motorbike?
No. Chopper is like, we had them in the late 70s. They like Easy Rider, you know, they've got the handlebars that go over.
Oh, okay.
They weighed a ton. I used to have one. It was the most dangerous bike you could ever have as well, because it was like totally unstable. You know,
Okay, yeah.
Right, you've got bars that go over and you can go really fast with a chopper. Had a big fat wheel at the back, so it was like big and then small at the front. So when you started going fast, the handlebars would be going like this, you know. Really terrible. I had a couple of horrible accidents on that.
Oof.
Wipeouts, you know. I'm trying to go each up with my brothers in that proper racing bikes.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't sound ideal. Yeah, this was a mountain bike he had on his chin.
Oh, well, that's heavy. Yeah, heavy.
Yeah, my dad's determination is something else. Because for me, like, I'll get to a level of pain. It's like, I've got to put this down now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it obviously hasn't done him any good.
Yeah. Yeah, so with that, like, we did it. He did one with a guitar on his forehead. And we got to a certain point, it's like, it's hurting in a really not good way. I can keep going, but I'm not sure if I should. And when he eventually took it off, he had these two giant divots in his head from the shape of the guitar. So it looked like he had like devil horns.
Shut everyone. Shut window.
Thanks, Dave. We'll see you later.
See ya.
Eating is not a good look.
There are whole channels dedicated to that.
Cooking rather than eating.
Eating as well. There are ones with millions of views of just people eating their food.
I'll have finished, Dave. I'm literally just mopping up the last little bit.
So I see.
That's why I'm doing it now.
I can hear you.
I don't know if you've noticed, but we're actually live on YouTube as we speak.
Yes. Anyone watching it? Hi, Bill. If there's someone called Bill watching, he's going to be freaked out. Oh, you're muted, Ben.
Well, that's better.
Right, go back on.
That's right. Yeah. So those are the certificates behind you, I take it, on the wall.
Yeah. I thought, oh, my video's been switched off. It's too much. Yeah. Like, oh, I can start my video again. Sorry. Yeah, they are there, some of them. And it feels weird having it all behind me, but it was sort of the nicest wall, and I felt I had to have something in the background.
It's like you're a rock star and you've got all your platinum discs or whatever. I don't know whether they even still do them, whether they used to do gold or platinum CDs after the albums. You know, you used to have a proper like LP made out of whatever.
A platinum MP4 doesn't quite have the same
No,
ring to it.
Definitely not the same.
Just the colour.
Ben, we seem to have lost your video.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at that. It says the hosts got rid of me.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what happened to me a second ago. I'm guessing Dave did that.
And it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
It was all that eating.
Try again.
Right, there we go. That's it.
Aha.
No, now, even though I have started it, it still says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
Computer says no.
I've just re-enabled it, so we should be okay.
Thanks. Yeah. So yeah, did you say you'd written down a couple of questions now, Jay?
Yeah, I've got some bits, just different things. Do you want me to go through some now, or?
If you like, yeah.
Yeah, just sort of stuff like, what was your dream when you started? What are your goals now, looking forward? In your experience, would you say it's easier to start now or when you started?
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's any you don't like feel.
The funny one about goals, I think I'm still aiming for a kind of goalless draw.
Yeah.
I never had any goals, and I reckon I'm probably most like your dad. Actually, your dad was the bane of my life for quite a long time. Yeah.
What did he do?
Seriously, well, he came down, and I think he was, at the time, he was with Roy Hudd's Hiss and Boo company. And I'm not sure whether he got booted out of this production for swearing or something like that. I'm sure he said bollocks, but he shouldn't have done, or something. Anyway, I forget what the situation was, but
is this when he got pantsed on stage? Okay, I don't know.
I don't know, but there'll be a story behind it. Anyway,
Yeah.
whatever it was, he came and stayed a night with my ex and I. And then, because at the time he was fairly well established and I was kind of just starting out, really, I hadn't done anything of any note whatsoever. And Steve was very organised about things, and he got this sorted out, and he got so many gigs here, and he had blah, 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 all this. And then for weeks afterwards, my ex would be saying, now, Steve did this, and why don't you do that? Because that's what Steve did, didn't he? And then Steve had this thing going on, and he got some gigs with so-and-so. Why don't you do that? Because Steve did it. But it went on for ages. I was like, oh, I wish I never had him to stay now.
Oh, yeah, my mum used to, one of her tricks in the early days was back in the days of the big old phone book, she would go through there and just start essentially cold calling people, getting work.
Was your mum then? Was it?
Yeah, she was the brains behind it all. He just threw things.
Yeah, that figures. Well, that was the same with my ex, but I didn't figure out that. I hadn't worked that out, I think, but it wasn't actually Steve at all. He was just doing what he was told.
We've got 15 minutes to start, please.
All right,
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, that kind of stands to reason, though.
Yeah, there's like other stuff as well. If you just wanted a vague idea, it's like, did you encourage or discourage your kids from getting into the industry?
That's yeah. That's quite an interesting thing, because I think, well, I can't shouldn't really talk about that in public, I suppose. My daughter, she was an amazing hula hooper at one time.
Cool.
You know, she was one of the best hula hoopers in the country, certainly for her age at the time, when she was about 13.
Wow.
And I think, I taught her a little bit, and then she just kind of like a duck to water. And I don't think she was that bothered by it until she did a competition in a holiday camp or something like this, and absolutely thrashed everybody else at just keeping it going, you know. And then I kind of thought, wow, this is, the hula hoop, you know, I'm good at this. And so she started to just get really good at it. And then she came to the Bristol Juggling Convention a couple of times and just pick stuff up like this, you know.
Yeah.
But then she ended up going and doing a psychology degree, which has been a bit of a disaster. I think she's done all right in the end, but part of me thinks she should have done it, you know, because she was a good performer. She did some really great little shows. She did a few competitions and stuff. She did something for Nickelodeon TV.
Oh, awesome.
And all that. And then she discovered technology, age 14. That was it. Phone, hoops in the corner gathering dust, you know. It was, yeah. So I was always a bit disappointed about that. But I mean, then again, what are you going to do? You know, she had to do what she wanted to do.
Yeah.
She's picked it up again recently. It's really nice to see it, because she can pick up the stuff she did before, you know, very quickly. But I don't know. I mean, I don't. And she's 22 now, so you know.
Oh yeah, certainly not too late to get back into it, but it's definitely when you have to be committed to going for it. Like, if you're not sure whether this is what you want to get into, it's going to be brutal.
Yeah, I suppose it depends how and where you come into it from. You know, as again, I did it. I was busking for years. I was busking for about 5 or 6 years. You know, and living was so cheap at the time. I didn't have to do anything else. You know, it was quite easy. So I think it was a good time. I came into it at the end of the 80s. So your dad was probably busking and stuff like that, 85, 86 or something like that, I think, in Covent Garden. So
what year were you? 84 he started.
84, yeah. So I started juggling in 85. So he was a bit earlier, but I was at college at the time. So I mean, Steve was ahead of the game as far as, you know, quite a lot of us were concerned, I suppose. Yeah.
Because he remembers trying to start out just with the big oversized glasses and a massive comb.
Oh, really?
Not really sure what a show is, just knowing he wanted to do it.
Yeah, the goofy guy. Here he is. Yeah.
It took him a long time to figure out his sort of character for performing.
Well, that's quite interesting. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like you have a comfortable persona that I'll probably ask you this actually, but do you feel comfortable on stage now? And have you always done, or is it something you had to kind of?
Yeah, like, of course, you're a lot more nervous in the early days. But sort of like being on stage from an early age, you've got an idea of what being on stage is like.
Yeah.
So the stage fright isn't the same as like everyone else, but then you have like the big sort of milestones, like your first like real show, and you're not sure if you can actually do the tricks you're supposed to. And also like my first foreign language show, like my first one just in full German, was incredibly nerve-wracking because you know if you think you're saying the right things, but until you get in front of a full German audience and the nerves have kicked in, you don't know if what's going to come out is just gibberish.
No, that's amazing. So do you do it in French and Germany, or just German, or?
Just in German, and then recently was when I did it out to a full Chinese audience on a cruise ship. Yeah, but that was a lot less talking. There were some Chinese words in it, but far less. It was mainly a non-verbal show, Chinese, which is crazy for me.
Yeah.
I might mute you when you're not talking if there's background noise. Yeah.
So we're muted when we're on, Dave.
Yeah.
We're muted when we're not talking.
No, if you make a background noise and someone else is talking, I might mute you.
Fair enough. Okay.
Always unmute yourself.
Okay, so just keep an eye on the mute.
Okay. Yeah, I've been noticing, because it feels weird not to react at all to what you're saying, but I've noticed if I make like very quick noises, it doesn't quite cut to me. I don't know if that's all right, or you want me to just stay completely silent.
If you want to interrupt, just do so, but quite forcefully. Don't just say and ah and yes. If you can avoid it.
So sorry, Dave, do you need a signal?
For what?
No, I think the reason to be careful about about talking is every time you make a noise, the camera cuts to you. So if you're making like an on or an R sound, the picture changes to you and takes it away from the person talking. So if you're going to talk, make it a definite response of some sort so that it makes sense that the camera comes to you.
Okay.
Yes, that makes sense. That'll really keep the flow go.
Yeah, exactly. It's just something to be aware of, and it makes it slightly awkward at first, but you'll get used to it. It's all right.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah. I can't remember what we were talking about, Jane.
I don't know. Well, we'll have to say it again in a minute, so probably for the best. Any questions I should be prepared for?
No, I don't think so. I ran through most of them earlier on. Just before, I'll ask you anyway, but did you have stuff lined up for this year?
Oh, yeah. It was going to be my first Disney contracts for a start. I still technically got pantomime at the end of the year, but it's looking 50-50 at this point. I genuinely don't know which way it's going to go. Yeah.
Who gets in touch with you? Is it the agency or?
Yeah, it's all the different agencies. Like, bizarrely enough, I do some work also for CSE. They do the military contracts.
Yeah.
So yeah, towards the start of the year when it first started with lockdown, they came through with some stuff, and they're like, "We're having to work under the assumption things are going ahead," and then obviously, you can't.
5 minutes.
I'm going to interrupt. If you can avoid a reference to the current situation, just because it makes it look in a year will look very dated if you're talking about COVID. Yeah.
We're muted. Yeah, that's all good.
Good.
So when I'm muted, do I have to unmute myself, or is it?
Oh, I can do it also, but
Cool.
you can. If you see you're muted and you want to speak, you can do that.
Okay.
That's
I won't mute you in general, but only in emergency.
yeah. Okay. Point taken about being quiet in between things. I get that.
Oh yeah. So Ben, after we've done our introductions, is it you asking the first question?
Yeah, we'll go into a chat thing. I'll probably just ask you about the records behind you. You can run us one or two of those.
Yeah, my modest positioning.
Yeah, and then you can mention Steve as well in passing that the old fool broke his neck in a daring record attempt. My brother broke his neck 2 years ago.
Oh geez, sorry to hear that.
He's fine now, but it was a long recovery. He was mountain biking and shot, hit through the woods kind of thing, hit something, flew off the track and landed on something. And people were timing him down the end. So when he didn't come down, people were going, where's he? He should have come down. By this course is only so long,
Sorry, Ben. Do you know about next Sunday, Stav and Ara are talking about the Jewish community and humour. Ara and Stav. No, you don't.
Are you talking about the interview the other night?
No, next Sunday.
Oh, okay. You want me to mention that?
Yeah, I'll send you details.
Thank you. Okay.
But maybe it's too late.
Yeah, maybe I'll get something on my phone though if you send it to me. Although my phone is actually dying out right now, and I'm only charging up here, so that might be a problem. If I don't get it, Dave, I apologise. There's not much I can.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, just because you were saying earlier, Ben, I don't have the theatre down with me here because there's not really an easy place I can put it.
No. Have you got that photograph?
I sent it through on the group.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know what way you want me to show it, if they can get that up on
or you can describe it in lavish detail.
I can.
Ben, you have a tendency to get too close to the camera.
Okay, if I stay back here, is that fine?
It's better.
Okay.
But you tend to loom very large.
Background noise.
Looming.
Yeah.
Okay, I shall try and cease from loom. I'll be loomless.
Isn't the loom something they do for sewing?
Yeah,
Yeah. How did those two things become?
yeah.
What would be a connection from one to the other? How it became a word?
I don't know. You could do like a 7 degrees of separation or something like that.
Oh, ta-da!
I think it's called etymology.
Oh, thank you. Well done. What, the source of words?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
There was
word had gone from my head, ironically.
The other day, Dave, there was somebody saying that the study of writing on a quiz, and then they said it was calligraphy. And I thought, well, that's not, when you study handwriting,
Yeah.
that's not calligraphy. That's a style of handwriting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dave, I'm going to start recording now.
Okay.
If you study handwriting itself,
And we let the punters in.
And shall I go live?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, you do it.
we're just chatting. Do I just lead in and do the introduction after a few seconds?
I'll give you all clear.
Okay, and I'm all right to look down at questions if I'm not talking and stuff. Just
I've chat.
Everyone will just assume you're on your phone, Jay.
well, that's what I'm thinking. If I keep quiet enough, theoretically the picture's not going to show.
Because of your age, everyone will have to go, look, poor thing, he can't be 2 minutes without checking his phone. He's probably got some message or something. So,
You won't believe what question he's asked me now.
yeah, what's that? What's that? I didn't understand it.
This is all going to be part of the live, part of the broadcast at the very start.
Ben, can you see chat?
I saw the little thing at the top. I can't see that because I need questions, don't I? If I open it, I can have a look. Yeah, I can't actually see it on my screen. I have to look at it. That's not good, is it?
No.
If you open it up and then just move it into the corner, maybe.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
I hope you guys are enjoying this. Hello, everyone watching.
Yeah, this is the good bit.
Yeah, this is behind the scenes.
I can't actually minimize it. It's just a bit, look at me poking at you like an old person with technology.
It's funny because seeing the camera, I just assume you're on a laptop. You're just poking the screen, assuming it's
no, I'm actually on a pad. I tried to mix the chat, but I can't. Is there a, there it is. I've got it, but I can't make it go smaller. But if people, I'll look every now and then for questions, and then it'll just look, the audience is here. Well, this is scintillating for the audience. I'm sorry, I'm poking away at the camera. A very good evening and welcome to the zoological chat for this week. I was going to be doing, my name is Ben, by the way, Ben Cornish, and I'm a comedy juggler from the Southwest. I started my career in the mid to late 80s. And one of the people I'm going to be chatting to was a kind of hero to me at the time in the early days, and kind of been there and done everything when it comes to juggling. But he's not so well, so I have the pleasure of talking to his record-breaking son, Jay Rawlings. So it was going to be Steve Rawlings and Jay Rawlings, but by dint of, well, it can explain why later. It's my pleasure to be talking to Jay Rawlings. Hello, Jay. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm very good. So as you heard, I'm Jay Rawlings. I'm a variety entertainer, and I'm lucky to do what I love and love what I do.
Jay, you can stop there a minute. Sorry, because I've just had a message from Dave saying we're not quite in yet. So, but that's probably what my intro will be. And then you can say your intro. That's absolutely fine. That's great. So I think this is funny because it's the audience gathering. So I should probably ask you about your health. How's your health?
What, me or?
Yes.
The audience?
No, yours.
I'm good. I might be the only one in the house who is, but I'm doing all right. I'm holding together.
Oh, really? But you've got new pooches as well, haven't you, running around?
Yeah, so we've got one that's about one and one who's just under one now. 6 months. So yeah, two Pomeranians, very tiny teddy bear poms.
Yes, I've seen pictures of they're like handbag dogs kind of thing, aren't they? Like
They're the most masculine masculine dog to walk, I can assure you on that.
Oh, really? Okay. So here we are. Good evening and welcome to Zoological for this week. My name's Ben Cornish. I'm your host. I've been a comedy juggler for about nearly 35 years now. So, well, started juggling in 1985, started a career in 88, 89, I suppose. And tonight I was going to be talking to a pair of fellow jugglers. And it turns out I'm only talking to one of them because the other is indisposed. So when I was starting out, one of the early jugglers I heard about and saw in Covent Garden strutting his stuff was the inestimable Steve Rawlings, man of juggling, balance, fire, danger, and all sorts. And I was going to be speaking to him and his son, Jay Rawlings, but because Steve is unable to be with us tonight, but we'll talk about him for sure, it's my great pleasure to be talking to his record-breaking son, and more of that very soon, Jay Rawlings. Hi, Jay. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm great. So as you heard, I'm Jay Rawlings. I'm a professional variety entertainer, and I'm very lucky to do what I love and love what I do.
Perfect. So, Jay, I'm just looking behind your head, and they look like sort of awards for albums, but they are Guinness Book of Records certificates, are they not?
Yeah, they are Guinness World Records. I know it was very subtle the way I snuck it in there. Believe it or not, they just happened to be on the wall, like, which had the best lighting. But yeah, so these are some of the random world records I hold.
And when we had a little chat earlier on, you told me that Steve, Dad Steve, has done his back in trying to go for one of these records.
Yes, so he was trying to do one of the other world records for the longest time with a bike on the chin. Unfortunately, the bike we have, the only one we've got, is a mountain bike, which is much heavier than it needs to be. But in full stubbornness, he decided he can manage it anyway, and he was fine for a while. And now he's really done his back in, so he's going to be in pain for a couple of days. So it's just me at the moment.
A push bike?
Yeah, the push bike, not a motorbike, luckily. I dare say he would be down for a lot longer if it was a motorbike.
The kind of things the Rawlings family do for kicks.
You've got to do something in quarantine.
Yeah, absolutely. Jay, I know friends who are jugglers and their children have taken it up and do a bit of juggling and stuff like that. But I think you're the only father and son act, or you're the only person who's gone into performing, you know, on the back of their father's career, as it were. So tell me, how did it start for you? I think you told me about the folk publicity shot.
So the very first time I was on stage, I was 4, and my dad would balance me on a chair on his chin. So little me would come running out and he would have me balanced on there. So I did that quite a lot when I was younger. So I sort of got used to being on the stage and loved being on the stage and performing. And then when I got old enough to do it in my own right, I started doing that. And then I started balancing chairs on my chin, and one chair led to another.
You haven't ever tried to balance your dad on a chair on your chin?
Not yet. That way I might do my back in as well.
Yeah. So was it logical for you to go into the business then? I mean, because you must have watched your dad performing when you were young. What sort of venues did you see him performing in?
All sorts. So there were some TV shows he did that when I was younger, I would be on there and he would balance me. And just here, there and everywhere. I would always travel around with him, like especially when I was younger and before I started school. Whenever he was traveling around the world, like Canada or wherever, me and Mum would travel with him. So I was always around it, always wanting to be part of it. And actually, he tells me, I don't know if it's true, that the whole being balanced on a chair on his chin was my idea, because I wanted to get in, I think it was in Canada, I was trying to get into everyone's shows when I was younger. And this was one of my ideas. So it was him and a couple of other guys managed to bully my mom into letting him try it. Yeah,
it's a great trick. But so it's interesting that balancing has been, you know, a pursuit that you know, it's a big part of your show, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big thing I do. Most of my records are to do with balancing. And yeah, it's just something I love to do, something that's a bit different. But obviously I also perform juggling and also magic for the people who don't know.
Yeah, well, I was talking to you about the magic in a little bit. Just carrying on the balancing front. I mean, I do a tiny bit of balancing in my show and balancing and juggling kind of thing. But tell us about a couple of the other things. You do golf club balancing as well, which is an old school sort of gentleman jugglers thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's a few that not many people seem to do. So I can do it with one golf club balanced on my chin, and I can go into lying down and then turning it around into like a seal position and stuff like that. And then also have 3 golf clubs balanced on top of my head and spin one round, and all different things like that I got taught from my dad.
Okay. Yeah, with the balancing thing, is it something you got to practice?
It depends what you're doing. There's a certain level that it's sort of like riding a bike. But past that, if you're doing like big weights or something like that, that's something you've got to keep up on. But there's a certain level you always sort of be able to do to an extent. But it's the same as juggling. If you don't practice something for a while, you might still be able to do the tricks, but you're going to drop a lot more.
Okay, yeah. And what's your approach to drops in shows? Because this is an interesting one for jugglers to always talk about, but do you have a strategy for drops?
Basically, sort of my approach to it is, if you take it seriously, the audience is going to take it seriously. And so as long as you've got lines and things to do, like sometimes people won't even know you've made a mistake. If you consider the circus boys, they'll deliberately do 3 drops in a row. My dad's told me, in fact, a street performer who, I wouldn't recommend this, but would deliberately drop his final trick 14 times in a row and then do it correctly. Which, yeah, that's a lot more than I would go for, but it works for him. The audience went nuts at the end.
You're going to want a string of really good lines, I reckon, to keep people there. Yeah. I mean, one thing I've known, having seen your dad's act a large number of times, is he's got a lot of business and a lot of talking all the way through, really. He never stops talking once he hits the stage, does he?
Yeah, of course. And that's the same for me. That's sort of the style I learned and what I picked up on. And so it was quite weird for me when I then went into doing shows mostly not talking recently. But yeah, it's just something a bit different, a different sort of style, working more to music, things like that.
If you don't have music with your show, because I know both you and your dad have a big comedy angle in what you do. How do you get the comedy in when you're not speaking?
And so for this particular show, the reason it was mostly silent was because it's for all Chinese audience. So I was working on a ship over there. And so I had some words, but obviously being an English person who's never spoke Chinese before, learning the whole show wasn't really an option in the time frame. So I have learned my whole show in German, but yeah, that language is a lot harder to penetrate. So it's a lot more mime, it's a lot more with the music. You have the music up at a higher volume. You sort of let the rhythm of the music sort of carry some of the weight, so you don't have the silences, things like that. So what got you started?
I started juggling or performing?
Both.
I mean, I was performing from a really young age. I knew I wanted to be a performer from the age of about 4. I saw a show, and it wasn't just a show. I was fascinated by the characters and everything, but I noticed that thing. I like being in a theatre. I really enjoyed the lights going down, that sense of excitement and stuff like that. But also when people went off stage, I was always like, where did they go? You know, what are they doing back there? When are they coming back? You know, so it wasn't, and I think I got taken backstage a couple of times and found it kind of really thrilling, you know, in the engine room. This is where it all happens. But so the first play I was in was Waiting for Godot. It was quite a complicated, difficult play, but I played there's a boy character in it. And I was about...
What's it about? It's not one I've heard of.
Goodness me. What's Waiting for Godot about? That's one of those, that's a whole thing in itself. It's about life and death, let's just say. It's about two old characters, and they're supposedly waiting for somebody, but they're not really, sort of thing. And it's all about the discussion. They're almost like clowning characters. Some people think of it as a very serious play, but Samuel Beckett actually wrote it as a comedy. So it's kind of interesting, you know, it's a bit quirky. And then I was in lots of Shakespeare plays. So I kind of got into theatre when I was young, and then once I'd managed to escape school, I did the plays at school, and they're terrible Gilbert and Sullivan productions and things like that. I was in those. But then I went and did O-level drama, A-level drama, then I went and did a degree. And it was while I did the degree that I met juggling. And I was in a house with a guy, he started juggling, so we, you know, encouraged each other. And then we formed a little street collective called the Banana Brothers.
As you do, yeah. That's quite a significant shift from mainly acting and that style of thing to I'm going to throw things on stage as well.
I was a terrible actor, but it took me a long time to discover it. So, but I was all right at performing, and there's a big difference between acting and performing. You know, if you're acting, you're being somebody else. But I realised that I never really wanted to be anyone else. You know, I wanted to just be a bigger version of me. You know, so I think that was. I realised, oh, it's performing that I do rather than acting. I didn't realise the distinction, I think, in between. But like your dad will tell you, we were brought up in what a lot of people think of as a golden age of comedy, which I don't agree with at all. But it was very big comedy, you know, like Morecambe and Wise, the Two Ronnies, all these things, and they were big shows. So, but I was going to ask you, when you were travelling around with the parents. So your mother has something to do with the showbiz thing as well, then?
Yeah, so very early days, it was when they first got together, it was her and my dad performing. So he started off as a red coat, and that's how they met. And they actually forced him onto the stage, and he really did not want to do it, didn't want to be a part of it. And then once he got on there, he loved it. And then like once they left and they started doing shows together, Mom always had stage fright though. So as soon as she could get out of the show, she did that. And then it was just my dad performing. But yeah, she'd still travel around, and then they also put on shows together. So Mom did some directing with that.
Oh, okay. So your mum was in a sort of a background producing, directing kind of a role.
Yeah, so she's very good at reading audiences, seeing how like a joke lands. Also, the sort of stuff you don't think about on stage, like just because something gets a really good laugh, it doesn't mean it doesn't make the show worse. So it's like it makes one thing funnier, but then they think you're a bit harsh, and you're not going to get as good a reaction at the end. Can
you give an example of that?
It can just be stuff with volunteers. Like, you know, me and my dad do things with a volunteer handing us glasses. And there's jokes around, there's two ways you can play it, like two obvious ways, which is one, you're desperately trying to find her and it's you and her trying to work it out together. Or you could play it, which arguably can get more laughs, but is a lot harsher, which is like, come on, what are you doing to me? Help,
okay.
Look, I'm over here. Where are you? What are you doing? Like, yeah.
You say you're trying to find the volunteer, but you...
Yeah, sorry, just to explain to other people, because I realise they'll have no idea what the trick is. Is I
go on.
Yeah, I balance a bottle on my chin, a tray, another bottle, and then I have a volunteer with glasses, and they hand me the glasses. You put the glasses up one at a time, and then they hand me clubs, and I juggle at the same time.
Right, so your head's up, so you can't see them, is what you're saying?
So you have some peripheral vision, but it's not that easy, and it's also a lot funnier to roam around a bit, because you could do that trick deadly straight, and there are performers who perform like that. But I just really, there's something about comedy that I just love to do.
I mean, I've talked about this with your dad before, but I wonder what your view on it is. You're looking up effectively for, I don't know, 10 minutes or something, aren't you, while you're doing the lines and having things handed to you. It's quite strange not seeing the audience for that period of time. Do you not see them anyway? Do you perform in situations where it's a black chasm?
You normally, like, even if it's a blackout, you have an idea of what the audience is doing. And over time, like just from hearing things, you'll have an idea what's happened. It's like I'll hear a noise or just a really big laugh from an audience, and I know that the glasses she was holding have smashed. There's just there's certain reactions from an audience where you know they've done something weird, like they've grabbed something out of the bag they're not supposed to have and they're waving it around.
So that's quite interesting. You get a kind of fine tuning of what's going on because you're not seeing. You're having to use the other senses more.
Yeah, it's just something you sort of pick up. It's not necessarily something you think about, or maybe even a volunteer's behind you and you get them laugh in the wrong place on a joke.
Yes.
And you know they've done something behind you. But you must have experienced things like that as well. Like, how do you tend to find it? Do you notice the audience when you're performing?
Yeah, well, I mean, even I mean, I do quite a lot of theatres. I quite often ask if I can have the lights up a bit within the audience so I can see people, because I have a number of volunteers coming up on stage, like you, but I'm never in a position of not seeing. Oh, that's not true, actually. I do one balance, that now you mention it, where I have stuff handed to me and then I put it all up and then balance it. But most of the time I'm not in that situation. But yeah, certainly, I mean, I was a street performer for a long time. And so things that happen live are critically important to you. And it's like that thing about not, you know, you're doing the show in that moment. And I think that's really important. And it's great if you manage to say anything that's to do with being in the situation you're in. The audience love it because, of course, they don't necessarily consciously realize, but it's the uniqueness of the situation. Oh, this could have only happened here because of that. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, of course. And that's what separates us from video. Like, one of the funniest endings I had was when a volunteer, I made some joke about sweating while doing this bottle balance. And I have a face cloth on the table to wipe my chin, because when you get sweaty, if you're not careful, you put it on, it'll slip off. And so I made some joke about sweating. Without missing a beat, she's grabbed the cloth from the table and straight over my eyes to wash my forehead.
Brilliant.
So immediately, like, I've lost all vision. I had to catch it midair. You get a giant scream from the audience. Everyone's laughing their socks off. It's just sat there, and you've got about 10 minutes then of just like, what were you thinking?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's a sort of gentle, and I noticed again, you have the same approach with your dad, is like sort of harassing the volunteer, but in a kind of a nice way, you know, giving them a hard time. Come on, why aren't you helping me out? I'm doing all the hard work here. Sort of.
Yeah,
approach.
so it's always trying to be doing like silly stuff, but not, it's their fault. So it's like, yeah. So the angle we try and come at it from is sort of a hectic show, but you're sort of trying to pull it together yourself. So it's constructed chaos.
Yeah, no, in that sense, it's situation comedy, isn't it? Literally, you're having a sitcom. You're creating a situation in order for the comedy to kind of work around.
Of course, yeah, and like half the jokes in the show are to do with like the tricks, or to do with different things you're doing. But yeah, how did you find it? Did you initially come at it with the comedy, like, considering you came from a serious acting type thing into?
I love comedy. I mean, I was well into comedy before I was ever into juggling. I was obsessed as a child with Laurel and Hardy, particularly, and the black and white. We lived in a period of time where, you know, there were very few channels on television, so they quite often were used to show the old films, you know, the black and white films. And they had them on Saturday mornings for kids, and then in the holidays they'd show them and stuff. So that whole, particularly the slapstick, and then later on I got into kind of other comedy and stand-up comedy. And of course, the other thing is TV programs back in those days, you know, Morecambe and Wise was on at the weekend, or the Generation Game or something, and they'd have audiences of 18 million people. You know, there are no programs now that would ever get an audience of 18 million, you know, apart from the Queen's funeral or something like that. You know what I mean? It just doesn't happen.
Crazy.
But they had it week after week after week. So we saw all these kind of classic acts, and were very familiar with them. And I think it's you know, it's more difficult now, I think, in some ways, to stand out. But do you think that you got a contract with some boats? Have you? How many boats have you done now? Have you?
So I initially started out, because the weird thing you wouldn't necessarily think about is juggling and balancing on a moving ship.
Absolutely.
So especially when it's really bumpy. And one of the things my dad taught me was juggling furniture. So when you've got the big heavy weights and suddenly you hit a bump, it goes from being really light to really heavy. So that's something that takes getting used to. And also normally with the balance, like the different balancing routines, especially if I'm juggling at the same time, normally on land, I would be looking through the balance at the clubs because you know roughly where that balance is going to be. But when you don't know what the ground's doing and that's doing its own thing, then suddenly you need to be aware of what everything's doing because you can't predict which way something's going to go. So that changed to, I'm now looking between both, and there's different things like that you get used to. So I started out on the smaller ships because you can't go straight into the bigger ones. And then I started doing the ones out in China, and then I had a bunch of contracts for Disney for this year. And
okay, so are the balances when you get into the balance, are you looking through the balance at other points to look at? So
yeah, so it depends on the balance. If I'm just balancing, then I tend to find a point on the balance, normally around the top if you can. And then if I'm juggling at the same time, so it might be halfway between the two, so I can see the clubs and the balance, or it depends on the trick, really. I did have a weird experience, which is, do you know 8 out of 10 Cats does Countdown?
Yes.
I went on that as a stunt double for Jimmy Carr, and they had me balancing a load of stuff.
I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things they had me balancing was a mannequin. But one of the things they didn't tell me till I got there was they put the mannequin in a dress. So I've got the shoe of the mannequin on my chin. And then, so the balance point is normally at the top of the mannequin. But then obviously as that's moving, and there's like, it's quite a big studio, so you've got a bit of a breeze going on. So the dress is moving back and you've lost all vision, and your only reference point is this bright pink pair of underwear they put on the mannequin. It was the weirdest feeling.
So welcome, you're listening to Zoo and hearing the upskirting anecdote, very appropriate for the times that we live in. So if you want to know anything about Zoological, this talk or other talks that have been given, it is zoological.ie, and the talks, when they've been done, appear on YouTube, and there have been some fascinating talks so far, and we hope very much that you're enjoying this one. I'm here with Jay Rawlings, son of Steve Rawlings, record-breaking juggler, and so you're on, Clown Power Live, brought to you by Zoological, I should have said. Jay, I have to ask you, comedy is your kind of bread and butter and how you're making your money. But I mean, to me, one of the funniest things is your world record that I've seen a video of at Glastonbury Festival. Could you tell us a bit about that? I mean, I've seen it. People will have to find it and look at it to believe it. But would you want to just tell us about that record?
Okay, so it basically came down, I've performed at Glastonbury for quite a few years, as so have you. And one of the things I wanted to do there was some world records. And I had the idea of doing 2 world records at the same time. And the one I went for was the longest duration and the furthest distance traveled with a lawnmower on the chin. So it was,
What was the current record with somebody with a lawnmower on their chin?
I can't remember the distance, but the longest time was about 6.5 minutes. And so I started off, and it was literally everything that could go wrong was going wrong when it came to do it, because you plan everything out, but there's certain things you don't account for. So we got into the field. So it's in this giant field in Glastonbury around the trapeze area. So they've charted out this course. We've got the official surveyor who's measured it all out, and they decided to do it smack bang in the middle of the day. So the sun's directly above me. So the whole way through, I'm looking straight at the sun. And then it was also quite a wide open area. So I've got the wind trying to blow it off my chin. And the one thing I hadn't considered till we started is they've got a compere announcing it. And it's like, we're giving a round of applause. I've got a person in front of me who's giving me directions, because my eye line's up here, so I can sort of see heads maybe, but with everyone so far back, and with nothing that tall, I just see sky, nothing else. But what I didn't realize is with everyone cheering, I then can't hear the person in front of me. And then she also got confused on her rights and lefts at point.
Oh.
So I'm very slowly marching towards the area. I got walked into a sandwich board at one point, and I'm just sat there like this, trying to balance it. So with all that going on, it took me a lot longer to go around than I thought it would. And I ended up doing double the time and like a fair bit over the distance. Huh?
12 minutes?
13. So 13 and like 5 seconds or something like that.
That's insane and so entertaining to watch.
Well, thank you. In a true British fashion, a bunch of the crowd just started chanting afterwards, "He's got a lawn mower on his chin."
Excellent.
Yeah, in the only way they could. But yeah, it's quite strange how, like, I've learnt this from my dad, but I was wondering your take on this, that how variety's changed. Like, you don't seem to have a lot of the short acts you used to do. And like everyone wants more, and there's not that same level of variety of the completely random acts that you used to get.
Well, I'd agree, but I think even in the short time that I've been doing it, as it were, which is whatever, 30 years, the difference with an act has changed. I mean, years ago, I used to do a half-hour show, and in the evenings at the places I would perform at, a lot of holiday camps and things like that, there would be 2 half-hour speciality acts brought in. Nowadays, they have one speciality act to do 3/4 of an hour, and the team, the Ents team, you know, do singing and dancing and do whoever the Vogue boy band is or girl band or whatever. So they do a lot more of the actual entertainment in these places to save money. So, I mean, I've always done 45 minutes, which is a, you know, inordinately long time for one person. But you're right, you don't get the kind of 7-minute, 8-minute kind of acts where somebody do some snappy stuff, and it almost doesn't exist. And so it's an economic imperative. I think there were a lot more people in the business years ago, and they also had that thing that they could tour all year round, you know, and then everyone will have forgotten them by the time they got back to the venue they were in. A bit different when your dad came in, because I mean, I think one helpful thing in his career was the sprouting up of alternative comedy clubs. So he did quite a lot of stuff, I know, in Jongleurs and the Comedy Store and things like that, because stand-up comedy was suddenly exploding into the thing it is now, you know. Alternative comedy, you know, the kind of non-sexist, non-racist stuff was massive at that time. And I think that was helpful for him to go on those kind of gigs, definitely. So.
Yeah, I think, bizarrely enough, I think he was one of the first ones to actually go to the comedy clubs. And it was more through stubbornness. Like, I think he turned up, I'm telling this story from memory, so he'll probably tell it better than me, but I believe he turned up to one of the clubs with his gear and just thinking like, oh, can I give it a go? Can I give it a try? And they had no interest in letting him, like they didn't know him from Adam. So the guy who was there said, you know what, come back in 6 months and you can have a go then, thinking that would be the end of it.
All right.
But my dad being my dad, 6 months later to the dart, turned up, and then they felt so bad about it, they let him perform. And then he went out really well, and it just went from there, basically. And I believe he even made it onto their record, strangely enough. So as a juggler.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I do know that story, of course. I've spoken to him about it a number of times. But with the comedy side of things, then, what's your, you know, how do you see yourself in is the comedy the biggest thing, the most important thing to your show? And do you mention the fact that you do comedy in your publicity? I was always told not to. Tell them you're a juggler, it was, and then say, if you turn out to be funny, it's a bonus. But if you say you're a comedy juggler and you're not as funny as you think you are, that's that's terrible.
Yeah, it's strange. Like, for me, the sort of centerpiece of the act is the comedy. Like, I'd hate to do a straight act. Like, there's lots of people who can do that sort of style very well, but it just doesn't feel right to me. I've done little bits over the years of just like straight bits. But yeah, like as far as advertising yourself goes, I tend to advertise myself as a variety entertainer. Like, I don't specifically say the comedy, but because I've got magic and juggling, and like in some people's minds, because they haven't seen like real jugglers, there's a tendency to think that juggling's boring. So that's one thing I've steered away from. And then also I have to be careful, because if I say I'm a magician and a juggler, they'll not put me on with the magician or a juggler, even though I won't clash on anything.
Yeah.
So what's your feelings towards that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about juggling. Is, you know, I mean, Simon Cowell has said it a number of times. Oh, I hate jugglers, you know, in his way, without really realizing what it's about. I think a lot of people assume they know what a juggler's like until they see one and they hear one. Oh, or they say, oh, I don't really like jugglers, but you were really good, is a classic anecdote that jugglers tell. Oh, I didn't realize juggling could be like this. And actually they're talking about the comedy rather than the juggling, you know, in that sense, because they won't remember that unless you've got a particular quirky trick.
It's kind of nice to have the skills there as well. Like, I don't know if you feel the same, but if it's a tough audience, you're going to struggle to get the laughs, but you've always got the skill. Like, if you do these bits, it's going to be hard for them to say, like, that was rubbish, when you can say, I did all these cool things. Obviously, you'll still have the gigs where that happens, but it gives you an easier time, I think, at the tough gigs. Whereas, like, comedy, it's like, if you've got a good audience, I don't think you can really top it.
I honestly think, you know, I was told years ago, skills for show, comedy for dough. And I just think that's true. I particularly think in this country, you have to be funny. If you're not funny, they're not interested. And why would they be? You know, I think, and people's view of skill in this country is much more like, oh, look at them showing off. You know, there's quite a negative sort of aspect, I think, to skills. So I think if you downplay it or you play it with a comic character, you're not saying, hey, look how brilliant I am. And I think that's a danger that all jugglers have to cope with. You know, one, they have to cope with they're showing off, and the other thing is they might drop, and how are they going to cover that up? You know, so they're kind of big things in juggling. But I was in a dialogue with some people the other day saying one of the problems about juggling, unlike a magic trick, so for example, is there very often isn't a narrative. So people who go away can't actually describe it. So for example, if you go and see a magic show, you can say, oh, I gave this guy £5, and then he did a card trick, and then he pulled a card out of an orange, and there was my £5 as well. You know, there's a little story. Whereas if you talk about a juggler, you go, oh, I saw this juggler. Oh, he wasn't that good. He dropped a few times. Or he was really good. He didn't drop. But that's
I guess, like, yeah, even when you've got tricks, it just devolves down to he juggled this, or he juggled 3 balls. Like, if you're doing all this crazy stuff with 3 balls, it's going to be very hard to explain that. It's just going to be, he did this, he did that. You don't have this long narrative. But it's quite strange how, sorry.
No, you go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's quite strange how audiences in different countries are so vastly different. Like, I know you would have experienced this. In this country, you have a very short window to persuade the audience you're any good. Otherwise, you've just lost them. And it's very hard to get them back. Whereas somewhere working out in Germany I discovered that it was best described to me as they sit down and they assume you're good. And it's only if you disappoint them, they turn. Because it's like, why would they have hired you if you're rubbish?
That's very nice. I like that. So they're kind of on your side until you ruin it.
Yeah, basically. So out there, you get much slower acts. You can get the sort of mime acts that will start off, and they'll just like slowly walk on, and then they'll look out into the audience, bring some people up, and set up this big scene. Whereas if you try to do that in England, there's very few places to get away with it. Yeah.
That's a really interesting thing, that kind of cultural thing. So did you think the Germans were a good audience as well? And did they enjoy themselves, or?
Yeah, they're a great audience. For me personally, I think a lot of acts, they'll have trouble if they're trying to come out and do it in English, especially if it's not your first language and depending on where you're performing. But yeah, like when you're sort of battle hardened and used to like holding people when they're trying to like run away or look for an excuse to not like you, I think that gives us a bit of an advantage.
You said that you did magic as well, Jay, and I know you've got a walkabout act where you have like a sort of mini theatre in front of you, haven't you? And you do the magic. Like,
yeah, so
you describe it better.
Yeah, so it's so normally if you're doing close-up magic, it's kind of strange because you're going up to people, and again, it's one of those you've got to persuade them you're good. But I found what I use when I'm walking around doing magic is I've got a miniaturized theatre. So I have two arms holding it up, and then the full curtains and everything. And my hands come through the curtains and do magic on the miniature stage. It's quite a visual thing. It's quite a character thing, and no one's mistaking you for some guy who's got some cards, who just happens to be wearing a suit or something. So it draws people in, and it's one of those things that sort of stops one of the barriers.
I think it's lovely. What do? Are you cards and coins or what?
Yeah, so cards, elastic bands, like obviously in that sort of setting, it's the much smaller things, and you've got like loads of attention on your hands. So it's quite nerve-wracking when you first do it. And it took me a while to realize, because especially if you're doing walkabout performances, you're getting families, you're getting like different sort of groups, and you realize there's different ways to approach different groups. Like with kids, I used to do a cup and ball routine on it. It was one of the earliest routines I learned. And I used to do a joke about, oh yeah, you see this one's got a soft top, and you just put that on, the ball goes through, and you're showing it's completely solid. But I noticed the kids are walking around, it's like, oh, that's a cool cup. And they don't realize you've done a trick.
Yeah, there is no trick. Yeah,
because you've got to be careful with your wording, because they'll just take your word for it at that age, like especially the really young kids.
But that's good.
Well, it's good to a point, but when they just don't realize you're doing anything, because that's the way the world is.
Yeah, but they're not bothered anyway.
Yeah.
So, that's really great. But have you found that your magic has helped you on stage as well?
Yeah, so it's sort of different styles of perform. Well, not different styles, but it's different types of things to perform. And so I love doing both of them. So it's weird, like sometimes the big visual stuff to a tough audience can be the more effective thing. And then when you get a good audience, you'll find the magic thing is by far the best stuff. So it just depends on your audience, depends on the show. It varies a lot. Like, do you have certain tricks that you find, like, to certain audiences are really strong and to others they're weaker?
Near the beginning of my show, I do a ball balance, ball spinning thing. And that's, I think, in many ways, my favorite part of the show, because I'm just standing there, literally, there's the ball spinning. So it's like doing stand-up comedy with a ball sitting there. And I really enjoy that part of the show, because I'm very free. As soon as you're juggling, even though you're looking at the audience, I find I'm still concentrating on the moves of what I'm doing. Whereas the ball is just there and I'm just talking. So the whole relationship I build with an audience is through ball spinning, the beginning bit. And I'm at my most comfortable doing that, I think. I mean, the ball stays for quite a long time, but it's more of an approach, I suppose. The manner that I do it in is set up at that point there. And the fact that I'm going to talk to people in the audience, I'm going to go up to somebody in the audience, all that is laid out in the first few minutes. So I really enjoy that. And obviously I enjoy the juggling, but I don't do particularly technical juggling in the show, really. I mean, I do much more difficult stuff for myself. I'm not that interested in performing technical juggling. I'm interested in connecting with an audience. I'm interested in laughter. So the show is not to do with how good I am at juggling. Never was, really. And I was never at that level. I juggled 5 clubs about twice, I think, for an audience, and then I just thought, just isn't worth it. Not worth keeping up the practice, and it's not worth it as a trick. Who cares, Yeah,
it's hard to, especially because the audience is never going to attempt like 5 clubs, like your average audience anyway. So they're going to have no idea what the work involved is. And that's the strange thing when you're performing to performers. The last will come in, or like the clap and the applause and all that comes in different places.
Yeah, I mean, I performed a lot to performing audiences. I performed a lot at conventions and things like that. But the funny thing is, I think the first few times I did it, I thought, I need something different. I need something special. And I'd really work hard on 4 balls or something like it was years ago, with lots of technical variations that I'd never done before. And then one year I decided to perform what I normally perform, getting the axes out, pretending I'm going to throw them at kids and stuff like that. And it worked loads better. I'd assumed that everyone in the audience knew all the lines, knew all the kind of, tricks. but that wasn't the case at all. And I'd made an assumption about it. So it taught me to not make assumptions about the audience that you're performing for. Sometimes people will get subtle things that you don't think anyone will ever get. And there are times where you think, oh, that was so obvious. It wasn't, you know, I wish I hadn't done it like that. But I think it's with comedy as well. I mean, I can remember I did a line once at a show and it was just hilarious. It was the funniest line I could have delivered. And I tried it again and again and again and again and again, and it never worked again. And it was a very simple thing. I was doing a Diablo, throwing it high in the air, getting everybody to go, wow, you know how you do to get a bit bigger crowd. And I was doing it. It was a really hot day when I did it, and people were just kind of going, you know, they weren't really coming with it at all. So I remember stopping and saying, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good time for me to tell you about my philosophy about life. I believe that life is a series of moments, and we can either choose to make these moments good and playful and enthusiastic, or we can choose to make them English. And in the place I did it, and the time, it got a great laugh. But I did it again, and whenever I did it again, I think people just thought, oh, what a sourpuss.
Yeah, there's certain things, it's just the right moment at the right time, and you'll never get that moment again. I just love some of the random things that happen during shows. I had it once in a routine. I had a volunteer on stage, and it was one of those stages which has a dance floor underneath. So you got the stage, and then in front of it is the dance floor, and then the audience quite a way back.
Yeah.
And they went to do something. They leaned forward a bit like that, and they weren't even that old. They're about 30, something like that. Their false teeth fell out, fell off the stage, and slid across the dance floor straight into the audience. And it was one of those, like, the guy's embarrassed but not like really upset, and the audience is in hysterics. And it's one of those when you just have to stop and let the audience take it.
Could the audience see it then?
Oh yeah, no, everyone saw it. There was no one in any mistakes as to what had happened. And the guy's in hysterics as well, and then like eventually sort of slunked over and grabbed it out.
So I've had a question from Maggie Irving, who is actually a friend of mine who lives in Exmouth, and there's a very fine clown and clown teacher. She says, have you ever considered anthropomorphizing a Diablo, a chair, or other inanimate objects, i.e. giving them a voice so that they object to being chucked around while you're doing it? You know, the chair has put me down. Have you ever tried anything like that, so that, you know, you make an inanimate object animated through thought? Or
no, there's interesting like stuff that I've seen people do things like that. It's never one I've done. Like, I've played around sort of in the early days with trying to learn ventriloquism and things like that.
really?
So yeah, I started to learn to do it. The one thing I do notice now is if I get really tired, I just start talking like this and just forget to move my mouth. just one thing I noticed. But yeah, no, there's some really cool things, and it's strange like how the human brain works, where it takes very little for someone to just switch off and then start talking to the animate object.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've even seen people on what was it, Britain's Got Talent and things like that. There was a guy who have you seen this, with 2 unbuttoned gloves, and it was literally miming to a song, and had the whole audience in hysterics.
You're talking about Tape Face.
Yes.
And did you know that he was a juggler?
Yeah, he was a street performer.
That's right.
He started out on the street. I actually, I watched one of his videos. Do you know what got him to do the whole Tape Face thing?
I can't, somebody's told me, I can't remember.
Oh, okay. It's basically, he decided to try and do a show without talking. And then his next step was, what if I do a show without talking and also without actually doing anything as far as like tricks go, which is where he got all this weird stuff from, where there's actually no real skills involved. It's just all comedy, clowning, things like that.
It's a fantastic piece of performance, I think. And so you've done these silent shows where you speak. Are you making any other attempt to be a comic character other than what you do, or how do you get across your comediness, as it were?
So there's sort of the jokes around the edges, and because there's, as you know, there's the jugglers that perform things very straight, bow, all that sort of stuff. but mine's always like hectic. It's like, hold this, do this, what's happening, that sort of stuff, and that naturally creates some comedy. And then on top of that, you've got the jokes in between to cover gaps, all that sort of thing, like making jokes to volunteers. It just sort of naturally came through that, and having my dad who already did that and could just give me a kickstart, it really helped being able to get into the industry. Because I imagine, like, especially nowadays, if you don't know anyone who's done this sort of thing, it's very hard industry to penetrate because you don't know what's a good show.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to get into. Yeah, I mean, I think it was easier in the old. I think you just kind of muddled your way through. Now it's a bit more cutthroat than it was. I think when your dad and I came, into, well, your dad first and me coming later, it was easier just to kind of muddle your way through. I think you have to be more organised now about how you contact people, and you've just got to be more professional about things. I mean, I used to have a thing where I used to like turning up looking scruffy deliberately, so people would think they wouldn't be sure whether this guy could do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of infantile now when I look at it, but I don't know. I like the idea people would be going, oh, and then when I came on, I had a nice waistcoat and a shirt. I was kind of smart and stuff. It's very childish now, but I I used to get a kick out of it, But I think that the whole comedy side of it, have you got any ambitions? I want to ask you in a minute about the hat routine that you did with your dad, because I really enjoyed that. But have you got any goals or ambitions now for yourself, now that you're kind of in the business and you've got a path? What's your kind of goals?
Well, it's always sort of working your way onwards and upwards, like trying to get my foot in as many doors as possible and sort of seeing what comes that way. I never really started off thinking like I'm going to do this to get to here, to get to there. It's just been sort of trying to constantly improve the act and sort of improve my publicity and stuff like that. That's what a lot of the records are about. And it's been a great distraction, like being stuck at home, like being able to do all these different things. And it's weird, like it sort of helps get over that initial barrier, like especially in this country, when like the audience needs that persuasion that you're any good, being able to say like, I'm the only one in the world who can do this.
Yeah, I think that's quite clever. Even if you didn't do it for that reason, I think it's quite a clever kind of ruse in a way to have a world record. And also because your world records are, with the greatest of respect, totally absurd.
It's true though, let's be honest.
Well, you did the Britain's Got Talent thing. So how was that? I know, because you broke a world record on that, but how was the experience for you? Because you know that quite a lot of people in the business don't like it and have very negative attitudes, particularly circus and skills performer. But how was it as an experience for you?
Yeah, I know for some people it can definitely be a coin flip. I definitely would say I went in with the safest possible thing I could be doing. Like it was very strange, like it's such a crazy thing, and you're there all day doing constant interviews and you're not sure what they're going to use, but it has really helped my career. Like it's helped get my foot in the door at different places when they don't know you from Adam. Like being able to say I was on this, I did this, has helped get into different things. It was also bizarre because when I first like applied to do the show, so the world record I did was the most chairs balanced on the chin. So when I first applied to do it, the world record was I think 5, and I was planning to do 6, maybe 7, which gives me some leeway in the future. And then it was about a week before I heard, oh, the world record is now 9. So good luck. So I frantically, because the chairs I was using, you couldn't physically stack them that high, and it just wouldn't work. So rushed down to, I think, IKEA and just like tried out like these different chairs. Eventually found one that could work. But then you've got to practice the new balance. So I'd been practicing a lot and my chin was hurting a lot on the day. So I turned up on the day, like with all the stress going on, genuinely not knowing if it was going to work. Wow. And knowing if it didn't, they're still going to show it.
Yeah, well, you did a great job. I know that your dad, in my mind anyway, is kind of, he's notorious for kind of business on stage, creating business and making things, finding ways to make things work. So with comedy, you've obviously got to keep the laughs going during the show. what's your focus on, you know, what are you trying to get for the audience? You say that slightly chaotic, hectic sort of ness. Is that your kind of main comic thing?
So yeah, you've got sort of that, because it's like you said earlier, if you present things like you've done it a million times and it's no problem to you, the audience aren't going to be fussed because you're not. Like, that's sort of my way of thinking about it. And then, like, when I'm on stage, I'm trying to read the audience and feel like, okay, the gags aren't getting as much of a laugh this time. Maybe I'll skip this one, get straight into the thing. Or they're starting to chat a little bit because it's a tough audience. I need to go straight into this trick now to build them back up so I can carry on. Or it's just different things like that. But like, when you got into juggling and things like that, was there ever a goal for you that you had in mind? Like an end point, like something you wanted to work up to?
No, I was very goalless, a goalless draw. I think my thing was just making people laugh, really. And I enjoyed juggling. I wanted to do some juggling I wanted to do, but I mean, just doing things that were funny or saying things that were funny or having a relationship, it was all about trying to do that. And I like, funnily enough, I've also done a double act for sort of 25 years with another guy, and that's kind of interesting because it's a classic double act, Laurel and Hardy kind of thing. I'm the straight one who's trying to do everything properly, and the guy I work with messes it up, or he's distracted, or, you know, he's incompetent and all that sort of thing. So I've got to try and keep him on track, and that's the basis of the show. So I spend 60-75% of my time standing on the stage looking pissed off. That's my job, standing there going, are we going to go on like this for hours, or is there going to be any end to this? You know what I mean? So it's like that kind of attitude. It's a lot to do with the comedy of attitude, because he gets distracted and goes to, like, oh, you got any sweets there, to some kid in the front row, and I just let him go. And like, the straight man job, I discovered is kind of reeling in the funny person sometimes. Maybe they're not quite as funny as they think they are. I mean, I don't find the guy I work with particularly funny either, but the audience does. So it's very funny from that point of view, because my annoyance is generally, you know, quite real. So that kind of works for us. I've got another question, which is interesting, from Susie. It says, how do you see comedy being for jugglers in the future, trad shows or bizarre? I mean,
What do you mean by that?
Not sure about the trad shows and bizarre, but is comedy always like a sort of a bedfellow of jugglers, do you think? I mean, is juggling, comedy and juggling, something that just carries on regardless of everything else around it changing?
Well, the bizarre thing is it's sort of dying out to an extent. There's still quite a lot of people doing it, but there's not many. But these things come in waves, like people find their own styles. Like, especially at the moment, you get a lot of comedy magicians, but there's not a lot of comedy jugglers. Like, you get some at the different levels, but yeah, especially sort of the holiday parks and things like that, you get hardly any now.
Yeah, I was the last one. We're not having any more after me. No, I don't know. It's true, but I think it's also the culture's changing. I mean, you're of an age where you were, I would say, brought up with screens, but you're much more familiar with screens than I would have been, or whatever, you know. And you didn't really have albums; you had CDs onwards. So, I mean, do you find that people? I mean, you got friends. Have you got friends that would ever go to shows, for example? I mean, how old are the audiences you perform for? Are they mainly middle-aged? If they're on cruises and stuff, they've got money, and, you know.
It's a complete variety. Like, I've worked to all age audience, like, and even I'm hoping to do pantomime at the end of the year, if it's all still going ahead, so you've got an audience of just kids, but comedy is something people are always interested in. And this is always something that comes up as time goes on. It's like, oh, there's so much video now. But they said when video first started, oh, I guess acts are just dead now, because people would just watch an act and then they're done. But there's something about being there live in the room, like interacting with people, not knowing how things are going to go on that particular day. And like, even if you've seen a show, like, there's always those random things that happen.
Yeah. Do you think that most of the comedy in the show happens, as it were, live then, even though you've engineered it and constructed it, you know, the quality of it will very much depend on the audience that you're doing it for?
Yeah, like in my mind, a well-made comedy show shouldn't feel like you've done it a million times. Like the goal always in my mind is like you've just thought of something at that moment and you're saying it. And even
Yes.
though the audience in their heads will probably know that's not what's just happened,
How do you
get that feeling?
how do you prepare for that? How can you, I mean, I kind of know what I do, I suppose, but what do you do to get that feeling before you go on? Do you have any preparation and stuff before you go on stage?
No real preparation, and I think a lot of it's just experience, because I don't think anyone could go on for their first show and deliver something like and make it sound like they haven't practiced it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a fascinating thing. So the show I do with this other guy we've done for years and years, it always feels live to me, because it is, you know, and I don't know what he's going to do to this day. He'll just decide to go off on one, and I'm like, oh, okay, you know, just go with that. But, you know, so that even more so than my own show, I like to feel my show's quite live, but definitely the double act we have is incredibly live. And speaking of double act, you have done a hat routine. Is it the only stuff you've done together with your dad, or have you done any double act kind of stuff as well?
It's mainly that we've practiced little bits before, but because we're always literally normally in different countries
Right.
working, there's rarely the opportunity to come together and do something together. So that hat routine we actually created for, do you know Palazzo? It was the one in Basel, so it's Switzerland, sort of Germany, that sort of area. Yeah, so it's a dinner show to like a German audience, essentially. And we were doing double bits and the joining material, like all the comedy stuff. And we came up with that skill routine together. So that's sort of why we came up with it. And then we just improved on it over time. And then the few opportunities we did get to do it. It also helped early days give me experience. So like when Dad was working on a ship and I was going on for the holiday, I could go on stage and have like 2 minutes or 3 minutes of experience in front of a like full ship audience.
Were they your first bits then on stage of yours?
So they weren't. Yeah, so that was my first ones like on a cruise ship. Like I'd done different bits. So like my dad helped incorporate me into his act, like obviously when I was younger, and then I started to do like some of the close-up stuff, and then more of the stage stuff as I got more confident in general. But yeah, it was definitely like a huge help, like being able to go up to that massive audience and like feel like this is what that audience feels like, because it is definitely a different feeling to a smaller audience.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, when I was just going back to your dad a minute, when I was realizing I was going to be interviewing you, when I thought it was going to be both of you, I actually wrote down, not the meek, mild, mannered person we see before us, but do you feel like there's a superhero cloak when you go on stage, which was to your dad in a way, because he's not a big, loud, noisy, slightly aggressive person in real life at all, is he? He's quite quiet and self-effacing, but when he's on stage, he's bombastic.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because he very rarely gets recognized a lot of the time because of that. Because suddenly he's off stage, the glasses go on, and he's just bumbling around like normal. And when everyone's seen that chaotic character, you just don't expect it. And yeah, that's one of the nice things. Like people don't realize they're necessarily watching a character on stage.
Yeah, no, slightly deranged, I think, is the kind of persona, which is nice. Jay, it's been lovely talking to you, and really great to hear about how you're doing. We're going to let any people that there are in as an audience now, so they can ask any questions of you or me. But yeah, and please send my best wishes to your dad, because I know that it's agony for him not being able to practice or do stuff. So, and hopefully we'll get a chance to have an interview with him at a later date. But thank you very much for being here and talking to me.
Thank you. It's been great. It's been great talking to you and sort of getting other people's perspectives on all these things.
Well, I look forward to seeing you at a later date, and we can chat in person.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Now my screen's changed, so I don't really know what's coming. Oh, we can just carry on chatting anyway. I didn't see any more questions. Hi.
Hello.
Hello, Master Jugglers.
How you doing, Maggie?
Marvellous. Juggling my life. Do you juggle your life, boys?
Try to. Hey, Susie.
Hello, hello.
Jay, do you know?
What?
Do you know Susie, Jay?
Of
No,
course
I don't believe I do.
Yes, you do. The
Oh,
elastic
no,
band.
sorry, I didn't recognise you there.
Hi, Susie.
Hello, Maggie. How are you, my sweetheart?
I'm tired. I've got to go. I've got to go to bed in a minute, but I just wanted to listen and watch and learn. I want to know what the certificates are on the wall behind you, Jay.
That's all nice.
Jay, what's
Go
the
on.
certificates on the wall behind you? What's behind you?
I've been practicing for pantomime. These are some of my Guinness World Records.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
yeah, so there's the one from Britain's Got Talent, which is the most chairs on the chin, the 2 lawnmower ones, and then the rest are hidden away.
That's
I
brilliant.
actually didn't want to put them on the wall, but my parents insisted.
That's brilliant. Well done.
You've got more certificates than I've got.
Give it some time, they'll come.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I got a bubbling certificate last year for Guinness Book of Records.
Oh, wow. What was the record?
It was for the most bubbleologists in one spot, and it was in Wales.
The most
Oh, congratulations.
one place.
Yeah, we were all blowing bubbles. We all had standard bubble things to blow,
That's
and we blew them. And then there was another one where the bubbleologists had to choose someone in their bubbles as well. So that one was breaking too. Yeah, it
I
was fun.
took part in a world record attempt at Glastonbury years ago, and
Yeah.
I've been juggling for about 5 or 6 years, and it was a world record, the most people juggling for 10 seconds.
That's
And
right.
Agus did a countdown. I dropped after about 4 seconds.
I remember that record, yeah, because we helped Agus to organise that.
We did break it.
We did break it, and there was another one earlier than that where Jazz Angelo, he broke it, and it was how many hours? Well, it was hours, Jay. It was like at that time it was, I think we had to break 13